Good morning, Brussels, and thanks for that. And indeed, my name is Mikko, Hypponen, and we'll be starting this year's Brucon off by going through memories. Memories of what exactly we've gone through. If we think about how much things have changed from the early days of virus attacks, the first early on hackers, the first defacements, the first spam runs, the first Trojans, all the way to where we are today, we have actually gone through a lot. And we will be going through here in Brucon what's happening right now. So I want to give some background to start off, and I believe I should be able to give you some sort of a run-through because I've been doing this for quite a while myself. The very first computer virus for PCs was found in 1986. It was called Brain. I have it with me, right here. This is Brain. I actually went through our old cupboards at the lab at F-Secure and I found it. We have a box full of floppies which basically has the first 100 viruses in history, or the first 100 PC viruses. Let me emphasize, PC viruses. Yes, there were some earlier cases for some mainframe systems, some Apple II worms before this, but I really start counting from this because of course this is a PC virus and we are still fighting PC viruses today. They are a major problem right now, 24 years later. Now, Brain was written in Pakistan. I actually wasn't working in the field at the time because nobody was working in the field at the time. There was no PC security industry. There was no antivirus industry. There was only one virus, right? I joined a little later, around 1990, 1991. But I have seen this problem explode from these very early days to where we are today. And I've seen the security industry explode from those early startups to where we are today, in the multi-billion-dollar industry that is the security industry. When I joined F-Secure, I was employee number 6. There were 6 of us looking at these things and trying to figure out whether there would be actually something that we could do to stop all these viruses and things like that. But of course, things changed. Now we have 850 people in 22 countries doing basically the same thing. And companies like Symantec and McAfee, well, of course today Intel, have thousands of people doing exactly the same thing. So what actually happened during these 24 years? Brain is going to be 25 next year. I'm wondering if we should throw a birthday party or what. So let's go through what exactly happened. Let's start from Brain, which actually is very interesting if you take a closer look into it. Brain spreads through floppies. Of course, Brain cannot be a problem anymore because nobody uses floppies. Of course, nobody has been using them for quite a while. But there are interesting things in there. For example, if you compare to how worms spread today. Of course, today they spread over the web, they spread over email, which means they spread over the net, which means geography isn't involved. Malware can jump from one computer in Brussels to one computer in Sydney in milliseconds at the speed of light. When viruses were spreading on floppies, of course, they weren't spreading at the speed of light. They were spreading at the speed of travel. If you wanted to infect a computer in Sydney and you were in Brussels, you had to fly to Sydney and bring the virus with you on the floppy. That's the only way it would spread. There's no other way for these things to spread. So it seems a bit funny that these could have been a problem at all. Yet, they were a huge problem. Many of these early floppy-based viruses, both for 5¼ floppies and 3½ floppies, were huge global outbreaks. We saw, for example, the 4 virus infect research stations, both at the North Pole and the South Pole, which pretty much tells you that they really went everywhere. And we have a very close equivalent today. The equivalent is this, USB stick. USB sticks and USB words are a major problem today. Of course, they spread at the speed of travel as well. Many of these only spread over USB sticks, which means if you want to move one of these from Brussels to Sydney, you have to fly from Brussels to Sydney. Another interesting thing about Brain. Brain was a rootkit, for real. At the time, we didn't call them rootkits, we called them stealth viruses. But basically what Brain did is that it infected boot sectors. It wrote itself on the first sector of the floppies. And of course, at the time in 1986, nobody had hard drives, only floppies. You had a computer with no hard drive, just 2 floppy drives. That would be the norm. So it would write itself the first 512 bytes on your floppy disk. And once your machine was infected, if you tried reading that first sector, brain would be in memory and it would have intercepted the interrupt the read sectors, and it would actually redirect all the read attempts to sector number 1 to the last sector on the floppy where it had stored the original input. Well, that is a rootkit. That's exactly what rootkits do. They hide themselves. To try to look at the thing rootkit is trying to hide, it hides it for you. So it's actually pretty amazing how advanced the very first PC virus was. So what did it do? Nothing. It just spread. Like most of the early viruses, they were just spreading. They tried to do nothing at all. Now we saw copycat after copycat like Stoned. Then we had viruses like Cascade, which actually was no longer spreading on floppy disk boot sectors. This was actually a parasitic infector which would infect your own programs, like your games. And when you were swapping them between PCs, you would also swap the virus. Yankee Doodle, very similar. This was found in 1989, 3 years after Brain. Dark Avenger from Bulgaria. We actually spent quite a while at the time trying to figure out who is Dark Avenger. There were many theories about the guy himself, but he was never found. Form, which I already mentioned, probably the most widespread boot sector virus in history. And then in 1991, Omega. And I can tell you that Omega is not important to anyone else in this room except me. And it's important to me because this was the first virus I ever analyzed in my life. I had a background history in programming, especially assembly level programming. When I started working at F-Secure, we got the first virus sample sent to us from a customer. Our CEO passed it to me because I knew assembly, so basically I could take it apart and figure out what it does. And I did that. I printed out the code on a stack of papers, went through it with Ralph Brown's interrupt lists, trying to figure out what exactly this program was trying to do. Actually, our operation at the time was so small, I didn't even have a spare computer I could infect to see what it does. We couldn't afford that. So I actually just went through the code trying to figure out what it does. And I found this feature in there which would activate a subroutine on a certain date. And the date checked whether it's a Friday and whether it's the 13th of the month. So every time it's Friday the 13th, it would do something. And what it did is that it would actually, well, I tried figuring out from the code, it would actually display one character on screen. And I looked at the ASCII chart and to me it looked like it's the Omega character. So I named the virus Omega. And the name stuck. If you actually go Googling around for the Omega virus, you'll still find this virus in different virus description databases. It was the first virus I ever named. 10, maybe 2 months later, I actually got my first replicant machine, the first machine I could actually infect with viruses and see what they do. So I infected it with Omega, and I changed the date to Friday the 13th, and I ran the virus. And yes, it displayed the Omega character, so I got it right. I was so proud. And later on, we started a tradition at F-Secure, which is that every time somebody's been 10 years with the company, you get an Omega watch like this. So I should have named the virus Ferrari. Interestingly enough, in a couple of months, it's going to be 20 years for me at F-Secure. And I'm the first one to break that, so I'll see, maybe I'll get another watch, I don't know yet. We'll see. Then we started seeing viruses which were destructive. Those of you who were around following the media in 1992 might remember the Michelangelo media crisis or media hype. This was all over the mainstream press. This virus was activating on the 26th of March and it would overwrite hard drives. Why? Nobody knows. This was very typical at the time. Many of the early virus writers wanted to cause chaos, wanted to cause destruction, which is something we actually don't see anymore. But at the early times, it was pretty normal to find a virus which would overwrite the hard drive. And everybody was waiting for some massive catastrophe to happen on the 26th of March, and then 26th of March happened, and there was only a handful of computers lost around the world. And of course, we've seen the same phenomenon over and over again. Remember Y2K. Everybody was expecting something huge to happen, but because of all the attention, all the problems were fixed before Y2K actually happened. Pretty much the same thing happened here. We've seen it over and over again. We saw it with Configure, for example. And then we started seeing more and more viruses which would start to play tricks with the user, which were actually visual. I have a couple of code snippets here that I'm trying to run for real. And this is always fun because what I'm actually going to do now, I'm going to run code snippets, DOS code snippets from 1992 or 3, which are going to change the display to a really funky refresh rate. So we'll see if these projectors can handle it. I'm going to run a piece of virus. Of course, I've actually removed the malicious parts. Actually, I'm running a COM file. You see that? That's my Windows computer, this computer right here, warning that I'm about to run a COM file. How often do you actually run COM files? But it actually works. You can do this in Windows even today. Let's see if the projector can handle it. Yes, you see that? That's a piece of code from 1992. And that's a piece of code I extracted myself from the vSign virus. And this is what the vSign virus does. When you boot up your computer, every 25th boot or every 30th boot, it won't boot up. Instead, it has this V animation on your screen, and then it crashes the computer. So it's like announces itself to the owner of the computer. Which, again, is something we don't see today. Today's viruses don't announce themselves at all. They don't play music, they don't have animations. Today, you don't know if you're infected. But back then, virus writers were playing games with the users. Here's another one. Elvira virus, written in France by a virus writer called Spanska. That works as well. I like your projector, very nice. That's a poem, talks about a French girl called Elvira, something like that. Again, it shows this randomly to the user. Very nice effect. And of course, this is like 120 bytes, so very tight coding as it would be at the time. Another example, this is the Walker virus. Guess why it's called the Walker? Every now and then you would have a guy walk across your screen. So you would know you're infected because there's a guy walking across your screen. You want to see more of these? I can show you more of these. Then Zook would show this on your screen when you boot up. They would continue booting up. Joshi, on the birthday of the virus writer himself, when you boot up the computer on the birthday, you won't boot up. It will actually show this to you and it won't continue booting until you type, "Happy birthday, Joshi." Then it will boot up. So again, playing game. And maybe one more example from Spanska. This guy actually had some fairly nice routines in his viruses. Let's see if this one works. This is a very neat refresh rate, as you can see. Like small demo effect. Again, this is 1993. And my last example is the casino virus, which actually works so that when it activates on random dates, it takes a copy of your file allocation table, the FAT, the FAT system at the time, the DOS systems had the allocation table at the beginning of the hard drive right after boot sectors. So it would take a copy of that to RAM, then it would overwrite the FAT on your drive. Then it would display this screen where it explains, I've just overwritten your FAT, you just lost all your files. But I have a copy in memory, and now you can play a game of chatbot. You have 5 tries. If you get the chatbot, it will write the FAT back to your drive, and you get your files back. You can win your files back. And it actually does this. If you win, it actually will give you your files back. If you lose, you lose. If you reboot, you lose, because the FAT has already been overwritten. There's a copy in RAM. That's what and we can actually play this for real. We can actually even win this for real. Of course, here, the one I'm running right now has not done anything to my drive, but it is the original code, so let's play it. Well, if I get 3 pound signs right next to each other here in the center, I can win. But I didn't. You asshole, you've lost, say by your balls. And then it crashes the computer, which means you can't recover your FAT from RAM. So, but I think I've made my point about how different they were at the time. Then we started seeing virus generating toolkits like NTE and VCL. And VCL was actually fairly nice. It had a graphical user interface where you would select options of what kind of virus you would want to create, and it would create the virus for you. And this, we thought at the time, is a catastrophe. We can't keep up with all the viruses they can make with these, which of course wasn't true. We could fairly simply create a generic description which would detect every single virus you could create with a toolkit like this. And then we started seeing Windows viruses, where, again, in the early 90s, WinVir was the very first virus running under 16-bit Windows, Windows 3.0 at the time. We actually found this ourselves. I remember this was how we started making connections within the antivirus industry, because we found this and we put out a warning on it, and it was picked up by the media and all that, and we started getting calls from